So I think it's about time we go take a look inside this Telecaster so you can know the difference when you're looking for one about what's right and wrong. So follow me into the shop and let's take a look. So on this bench here, we have a basic setup of tools, and it helps us to go through the guitar. But usually when I first take a guitar out of the case, one of the very first things I do is I smell it. That's right, I smell it. New paint smells like new paint, and old wood smells like old wood. And one of the very first things I do, because you really have to use all your senses when you evaluate a guitar, is take a big deep whiff. Smells like grandma's attic, and that's kind of what you want. So now let's break out and show you what tools are necessary. The first thing we use is a standard capo, okay? And the reason why we use this is just more of a convenience. If we take the capo and we lock it down over the first couple of frets, it allows us to loosen the guitar strings without them flopping all around and coming out of the headstock. So we can loosen these up, and I usually loosen them until I can press the string straight down to the pickguard with ease. All right, that's a good guideline that I use. Now that the strings are loose enough, okay, and kind of flopping around, the capo's holding them in place at the headstock, we're going to remove the neck. Now, I know for a lot of people this kind of gets a little scary, all right? I'm taking my guitar apart. Well, if you have basic mechanical inclinations, this is not a very difficult thing to do. Use a number 3 Phillips screwdriver, which is one of the largest screwdrivers you'll have in your collection, okay? And take a look at the back. Now, since I'm left-handed, and I do it with my left hand, I'm going to turn it to face the camera, but this is not the normal angle that I use. Make sure you have a firm grip of the screwdriver. You don't want it to bounce out of the screw while you're doing it. I usually place my hands. I'm holding the neck with the palm. I'm using my fingertips to hold the neck plate on, and I start to just turn. Just remember, lefty loosey, righty tighty. We all learned it. Okay, and we're going to take each individual screw out. And I know I'm moving a little quickly, and that's only because I do it every single day. Okay. Always use your fingers as a guide to make sure the blade of the screwdriver gets in the screw. You don't want that screwdriver to pop out, scrape up the back of your guitar. It's happened to everyone, okay? So, use care. So once I get these screws loose, by holding the neck on with my palm, I take the neck plate off with the screws at the same time. All right, so once I make sure that everything is loose, everything pulls off. And the first photograph that we take is a picture that's taken of the back of the neck pocket, okay, along with the back of the plate. And the reason why is because sometimes you'll see a transfer of paint that came off the guitar onto the neck plate, and you want that to match. If there's paint on the neck plate that's blue, we know this guitar was never blue, so we don't want it to look unnatural there. We want things to line up. You'll see certain shadows or dirt, and you want it to line up. So that's one of the first things that we look for. Place the neck plate aside with the screws in it, turn the body, and start to remove the neck. Sometimes they come off easily, and sometimes they're stubborn. If they are tight and they don't look to come off easily, just a little slap from the palm of your hand will loosen it up. If it's never been off before, you may hear the sound, a little cracking sound. That's not the wood. That is the paint giving way. As when new paints were freshly painted, things tend to stick together a little. Okay, so this is our first point of reveal. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look here and we're going to see a body date. And if you look closely, it'll say TG for Tadeo Gomez, okay, who did a lot of early production work for Fender. And you'll see the date, 10/31/51. So October 31st. So this is a Halloween special right here, okay? On the neck, we look at the neck date, and the neck date, usually very close by, says TG for Tadeo Gomez, 11/7/51. Now I'm going to try and give you an angle of that so you can see it. Hopefully you can get that on the camera. Okay, so that is your neck date. Now, there's a couple of other things that I want to show you. I'm going to lay the body down and we're going to concentrate on the neck. We're going to look at a shim. Now, this is a homemade shim. It's made out of sandpaper. It's very common that not all neck pockets were cut properly, and as guitars age, they require shims. Fender did have a factory shim, okay, for some guitars as they were new right off the production line, and sometimes people made shims after the fact. This one was made after the fact. You'll see here that there's the 4 holes to mount the neck to the body, but there's a 5th hole here. And that 5th hole that's right here is the jig hole. Okay, there's another one underneath the D string tuner, and those 2 jig holes helped guide the neck blank as it was being cut at Fender. All right. You'll also, just like we talked about that transfer between the body and the neck plate, you'll see it here too. You'll see little markings of missing lacquer here and round halos, and you'll see the exact same things right here inside the body. Okay, that will tell me that this neck, almost 100% guaranteed, came from this body when it was new. Okay, so when you get in here and you're going to look at this, you're just going to make sure that, again, that transfer is there. We're going to lay the body down and we're going to lay the neck across from it gently. Okay, and then we're going to get into the body of the guitar. Now, there's lots of different things we're looking for. The very first thing that we're going to look for, we're going to take off the pickguard. Now, this is an interesting guitar because it's transitioning between the Phillips head screw, or I should say the original slot head screw, and the Phillips screw, which took place during 1951. Keep in mind that Phillips screws were originally part of the war effort and not available to the public. So Leo didn't have access to buy Phillips head screws until mid-1951. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take out each one of these slot head screws. Now remember, a Phillips screw was developed for more stability. Okay, when you're using a flathead screwdriver, it's a lot more delicate of a process, as it's pretty easy for that screwdriver bit to slide out of the screw. So usually I'll just keep my hand around it as I move, just in case there's a little accident of the screwdriver slipping, I'm right there to protect it. So as I get this 5th screw out, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use our fingernail and we're going to lift the pickguard off the guitar. And one of the very first things we're going to do is we're going to kind of get a look at the back. Now, the back will not have lacquer on it, so you'll see more of the natural surface here as opposed to the shinier lacquered surface. Sometimes, especially earlier on, you'll see a round circular pattern on the back of the pickguard in this area. That was caused by the pickguard being laid on top of a paint can and then sprayed. Underneath, the spray would bounce up and the overspray would land on the underside of the pickguard, leaving a round circular mark from the paint can. Okay, this one doesn't have it. So we were going to talk a little bit about Bakelite and what makes it different. Remember, this all started as a powder. So a good way, since there's a lot of people that'll forge these pickguards, a good way to tell an original pickguard is to take a simple single-edge razor blade like this, all right, and you find the area of the guitar, of the pickguard, where it goes to the bridge, and there's a flat surface here, a very straight line. And what I'll usually do is I'll take the razor blade and I will just gently slide it across a few times, and I will look at the razor blade and I will see powder. If it was plastic, you'd see slivers. As you can see here on the razor blade, there is like that black powder that we talked about from the Bakelite. And if you look around the guitar, I can kind of wipe it up with my finger a little bit. So this is the first formation of what we're looking at. Underneath here, you're going to see the original color of the guitar without the fade. Okay? One of the things you're going to look for is a good tan line, and that's what we like to call it. This guitar has played many gigs, probably had beer on it, and the sweat, you know, through the years, and you want to see the original unfaded color. There are also a couple of other things you're going to look for. There's going to be a couple of holes here that don't do anything because there's no pickguard holes, but there's one here, there's one here, there's a couple of other ones hidden, which we'll show you. Those are pin router holes, okay? And basically a tiny little nail would go in here, hold the body in place for when the guitar was driven through a router jig or when the guitar was painted. And that purpose changed from time to time. But you should see these. If these are filled with paint, that's a bad sign that your guitar has been refinished. Okay? So we're going to lay that back down. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a Phillips head screwdriver on this guitar. Okay, and we're going to use a regular number 2 Phillips, and we're going to remove the 2 screws that hold on the control plate. Now remember to keep these separate from your slot head screws that hold the pickguard on, because they're larger. And if you go to put them into the pickguard holes, it's basically going to expand that hole and strip that hole out. So make sure you're very careful about where the hardware goes. Well, this is the guts, and this is one of the greatest parts. This is one of the telltale signs, and a lot of times you see some cool stuff. But in here, you're going to see the potentiometers, which is the basic underside of the volume control and the tone control of the guitar. You're going to see the 3-way switch in all its glory, and you're going to see the capacitors that help keep this guitar, actually help filter the tone to the neck pickup. The switch will usually have a marking on it, which was made by CRL, and the number is usually 1452. And on virtually all potentiometers, there is a potentiometer date, which is underneath the solder on this particular guitar. And a lot of early 50s guitars, the solder happens to land right over the date. They weren't caring at that time about you seeing the date. They never thought it was ever going to matter. Remember, these guitars were made like wrenches in a toolbox for a guy to go out and play his gig that day. So there wasn't a whole lot of thought that went into making sure 50 or 60 years later you could see that date. But if you do look carefully, you can see on this one it's 144. So if it's 144, that 1 signifies 51, and 44 signifies the 44th week. Okay, so it's the 44th week, all right, which puts it probably somewhere in November, if I got it right. And the neck date and the body date are end of October, so that all adds up to me. I like what I see. All right, so sometimes look in this control cavity, not on this particular one, but sometimes there'll be a piece of masking tape in here that'll have a lady's name, usually Virginia or Georgia or Gloria, and she's the person that did the electronics assembly, as most of the electronics and tedious work were done by women at the Fender plant back then. Okay, so we're going to put these 2 screws back in. One thing I want to show you, there's another one of those little pin router holes. You see the hole here for the control plate, but right next to it is a teeny little hole. That's the pin router hole. You take your same tool, your number 2 Phillips, that you took the guitar apart with, but when you go to put the screw back in, you don't want to over tighten it. Remember, this wood is almost 70 years old, or could be 70 years old now. So when you tighten it, never really use the handle of the screwdriver. You're just going to do it with the blade itself and using your grip. This way you assure that you never over tighten or strip a screw. All right, it just goes in, and again, just snug, never tight. All right, so just keep that in mind. Once that's done, the control plate is good, sharp, right onto the body. Next, we'll replace the pickguard. Okay, it's the same type of thing, but now when you're working with a slot head screwdriver, I advise you to hold on to the handle as you guide it in. I usually put the screw right on the end, like this, and then hold it with a finger to make it all one long piece. Put it into the body and start to turn slowly. Again, you don't want to strip out that wood, and also keep in mind if you over tighten this screw, especially this screw, you will snap the edge of that pickguard right off. And when you do that, you will be sorry when you have to spend thousands to find an original pickguard. So there's a couple of things we haven't done yet we're going to do, and it takes no time at all. This could be a little bit tedious because you have to remove the screws that hold the bridge. There are 4 Phillips screws that are fairly long that go into the body, okay, that are stuck behind the string saddles, which are made of brass, okay, and that requires moving these saddles around, and sometimes it can get a little frustrating. Be careful when you do it, okay, that you don't bend anything or force anything. Take your time, okay, and I usually start on one side, and I'll get that number 2. Sometimes you have to kind of tilt the saddles around to the side. I don't know if you can see that clearly. All right. And once you get them to a point where you can grab it with your finger, put it off to the side. Now you have that point where you have to move 2 saddles to get to the next screw. Now when you go to remove the bridge, remember that the strings are here and there's only a certain amount of string length, so you can pull the neck a little closer, and then you can lift up the bridge. Be gentle as you're also taking the pickup up out of the body. So let's do that. There we go. All right, so we're going to get a look underneath. And again, remember that you may need to move your neck closer to give you a little more slack. Okay, and here we are. We're underneath the body, underneath the bridge, and I'm looking in the route. The route looks all very factory. Everything in here, the dirt under the bridge, everything. Don't just leave it alone. I know a lot of people feel that urge to clean, okay? That dirt is 50 years old. I want to leave it alone, okay? Here is the bottom of the pickup, and you'll see where the pickup is. The lead is actually from the bobbin is soldered to the wiring that goes to the controls, and you'll see the silver-colored plate. Later, they're replaced with a copper plate. All right, but that'll give you a good look as to what you're supposed to see underneath. Remember, underneath of the bridge is never polished nickel. Okay, so it's not shiny like the top part that you'll see. All right, Fender did not spend an extra penny on anything he didn't need to do. So remember, this is a factory. There was no real craftsman. Okay, the person who cut this body and cut this neck were timed on a stopwatch at 45 seconds. They gave you a piece of wood, use the stopwatch, 45 seconds. If you can cut out the shape of a body, you got the job. If you couldn't do it in 45 seconds, you didn't get the job. The whole idea that these people were skilled craftsmen is untrue. These were laborers. All right, so we're going to replace this back end. And just be careful as you go in with the pickup. I mean, this can be a little... You know, press the bobbin in. Be careful not to press too hard. All right, now you're back in, and we're going to replace these screws again using the same method we did before. All right, and remember, there's lots of different types of guitars, and each one has its own little procedures. You can always feel free, if you need to reach out. If you've never done this before, you can always reach out, and we can help you walk you through it. And if you're uncomfortable, you can certainly let us do it for you. Okay, so now we're tightening up this last screw, and now we're going to put the neck back on. And this is something that I want you to pay some attention to. All right, well, we had that little sandpaper shim. That has to go back in, and I put it in at the neck pocket, right back where it was. And people ask me all the time, when I put my guitar back together, am I going to have to set it up again? Yeah, probably, to some extent. It's not so much of anything except the fact that you have now shifted the neck, you've removed things, the string saddles have all moved a little bit. So you want to be able to put it back right. So, but the first thing we're going to do is just get the neck back on. All right, so you're just going to kind of get the guitar up, put the neck in the pocket. See how this goes right back in? Kind of just, the strings are kind of holding it in place. Now remember how I kept my palm against the fretboard? All right, and I take the neck plate and I start to insert the screws. Of course, you know, whenever I need it to happen exactly the way I want it to, it doesn't, but. So you're basically going to get these screws back in the holes. And there we go. You can push the screws in and hand tighten them a few turns just to make sure everything's going in the way you want it to go. All right, you should feel no big resistance here. They're finding their natural place to be. If you're finding resistance, make sure that the neck is properly seated in the pocket. Okay, we're going to reach back for that number 3 Phillips, which is your largest one. And now when you tighten them, we're going to do something a little bit different. This is an old auto mechanic thing, and it's called torquing. Okay. So you're going to tighten the screw just snug. Then you're going to go diagonally across from that screw to tighten the next screw. This is a torque sequence. Once they're tight, we're going to feel pretty good about the guitar being solid. You can just check the neck in the pocket. Everything looks good. One other thing that I always want to point out to you that people miss, and I'm going to bring the guitar down like this, but I want you to keep your eyes over here by the decal. You know, Fender used different decals in different years. Some of them are gold, some of them are silver. But the most important thing that you want to do is you want to take your finger and you want to run it across the decal because you want to feel texture. And the reason why is because the decal went on last over the lacquer, not under the lacquer. So if you go like this and it feels smooth, that means the lacquer is over the decal, which is a surefire way to tell that there has been an overspray or a refinish situation going on with the guitar. All right, so after that, we're just going to tighten our strings again. I'm not going to go through a whole setup right now, but you know, I'm going to tighten them up and just get some tension back on the neck, which is important. All right, and then once we do that, we can tune it back to pitch, or we can change your strings, however you're going to do it. And then you're pretty much done. So what we're going to do is just get a little more tension, then we'll pop our capo off, and that's a really good way to go through your Blackguard Telecaster, Esquire, Broadcaster, Nocaster. All right, like I said, certain guitars have different things you need to know, but that's not a problem. Feel free to ask, we'll help you any way we can.